Every shift begins with routine. The sound of boots on concrete, the flicker of lights overhead, the calm that hides the danger beneath. But when a single choice shatters routine, the truth of loyalty, revenge, and survival emerges, leading to a night that exposes secrets darker than the prison itself. The twists will leave you questioning who the real enemy is until the final moment. So make sure you like, subscribe, and share your thoughts about the story in the comments, and tell us your city or country while you're at it. Officer Lauren Hayes, a young white guard at Monroe County Correctional Facility, was patrolling Block C when she noticed something unusual: complete silence. For years, Lauren had walked these same dimly lit corridors, her boots ringing against the concrete floor in a rhythm as familiar as her own heartbeat. The fluorescent bulbs overhead buzzing faintly, sometimes flickering with age. Normally, Block C was alive with the restless noise of men crammed together, snores echoing off steel, muffled curses from card games, coughs that carried through the night, and the shifting of bunks that never seemed to stay quiet. Tonight, however, there was nothing. It was not the quiet of peace or rest, but a silence heavy enough to raise the fine hairs on the back of her neck, a silence that felt deliberate, coordinated, oppressive. Lauren slowed her pace, scanning each cell door as though the absence of sound had become more threatening than any outburst of violence could be. She reminded herself of her training: maintain composure, show no fear, control the room with presence. Yet something in the pit of her stomach told her she was no longer in control at all. She reached for her radio almost on instinct, her thumb brushing over the button she knew dispatch expected her to press for the scheduled hourly report, but she hesitated. Breaking the silence felt dangerous, like it would shatter a fragile balance she didn't yet understand. That was when she stopped outside cell 18, and her gaze locked on the man inside. Darius Cole sat on his bunk, his posture rigid, his dark skin glistening faintly with sweat despite the chill of the block. In his 40s, with strong shoulders and a steady presence, he had become something of a ghost in this place, not feared like some of the others, not loud, not prone to fights. Darius had always kept to himself, a man who seemed content to fade into the background, reading books in his cell or exercising quietly when the yard opened. Officers respected him even if they didn't say it out loud. He was the kind of inmate who made their jobs easier by not adding chaos to the mix. But tonight, Darius looked nothing like the man she had come to expect. His eyes were wide, fixed on her with an intensity that unsettled her. He leaned forward, gripping the edge of his bunk as though bracing himself against invisible weight, and whispered with such urgency that the words nearly escaped her hearing. "Don't speak!" Lauren froze in place. The rule was clear: never give an inmate the upper hand, never entertain their games, never deviate from protocol. Inmates whispered all the time, usually manipulations, distractions, or tests to see how much control they could exert over the guards. By rights, she should have dismissed his words and moved on without pause. Yet there was something in Darius's tone, something in his eyes that stopped her cold. They were not the eyes of a manipulator, not the eyes of someone trying to play a cruel trick. They were the eyes of a man gripped by fear, and Darius Cole, in all her years of working this block, had never shown fear before. She took a cautious step closer, careful to keep her expression unreadable. Her hand brushed her radio again, but she didn't raise it. His warning echoed in her mind: "Don't speak." Silence pressed between them, thicker than the concrete walls surrounding them, and in that suffocating moment, Lauren realized that this was no ordinary night. Darius's eyes flicked down the corridor toward the far end, then back to her, the message clear even without words. Danger was near. Lauren's pulse quickened, her training reminding her to stay calm even as instinct screamed otherwise. She hadn't seen movement down the hall, hadn't heard anything but her own footsteps, and yet the weight of Darius's warning made the empty corridor suddenly feel full of unseen threats. She leaned in slightly, her voice caught in her throat, tempted to break the rule of silence, but she stopped herself. His command had been too deliberate, too precise: "Don't speak." And so she obeyed for reasons she couldn't explain even to herself. She stood still, watching him, searching his face for answers, while every second stretched longer, each breath heavy with anticipation. Somewhere in the building, another radio crackled faintly, a reminder that the world beyond this block was moving as usual. But here, in this stretch of corridor, time seemed to hold its breath. Darius's jaw tightened, his lips pressed into a thin line before he whispered again, softer this time, almost breaking under the weight of what he held inside. Not here. He glanced once more toward the shadows at the far end of the hall, then back to her, his expression pleading without words. Lauren's heart hammered in her chest, and for the first time in years on this job, she felt the unnerving sensation that her life was balancing on the edge of a knife. Her mind raced. She thought of the countless warnings drilled into her during training. Never trust an inmate, never allow emotion to cloud judgment, never step into their traps. And yet everything about Darius's behavior told her this wasn't a trick. He wasn't baiting her. He was warning her. He was risking himself to do it. She realized suddenly that every instinct she had relied on through her career was being tested in this moment. Did she trust her training and move on? Or did she trust the man who had whispered 2 words that carried more urgency than any threat she had ever heard? She shifted her stance slightly, keeping her back straight and her hand near her holster. The faint hum of fluorescent lights above blending with the echo of her heartbeat in her ears, and she glanced toward the far end of the hall where shadows pooled in the corners, the kind of shadows that could conceal movement, though to her eyes the space looked as still as ever. Darius kept speaking, his words measured but desperate, telling her the names of those involved: Carver, Lynch, Maddox, men she knew well from disciplinary reports, men with violent histories who thrived on intimidation, each one more dangerous than the last. Carver had been written up twice for attacking another inmate with a sharpened toothbrush handle. Lynch had once thrown a punch at a guard during yard duty, and Maddox was new but already infamous, transferred from a maximum security facility after multiple incidents of inciting fights, and now, according to Darius, these 3 had banded together in secret, waiting in silence, preparing to ambush her the moment she passed the blind spot near the checkpoint. Lauren's radio crackled against her shoulder, dispatch requesting her hourly report, the voice crisp and professional: Unit 12, status check, respond, and in that second, she realized the choice before her was immediate and dangerous. If she answered, if she broke the silence and spoke into that radio, the men lying in wait might spring their trap early, catching her off guard. But if she ignored the call, dispatch would send backup, and backup meant noise, meant movement, meant stirring up whatever this fragile balance was that Darius seemed so terrified to upset. She hesitated, seconds ticking away, and Darius leaned even closer, his whisper sharper now. Don't call it in, not yet. They'll hear, they'll scatter, and then they'll try again another night when you won't see it coming. Listen to me now, because I don't have long before they suspect I warned you. Her training screamed at her to maintain protocol, to always call for backup at the first sign of threat, but her instincts, honed over 8 years of walking these halls, told her that what she saw in Darius's eyes was no fabrication. She studied his face, recalling all the years he had been nothing more than a shadow in the background, never stirring trouble, never drawing attention, and the fact that he was breaking his silence now made his warning feel undeniable. She leaned in slightly, lowering her own voice so that no one else could hear, surprising herself with the words that came out. "Why are you telling me this?" And without hesitation, Darius answered, "Because you don't deserve it. You treat us like people, not like animals. You show respect when most wouldn't, and I won't let them do this to you." Lauren felt the words sink deep, more unsettling than she expected. Because while she always prided herself on fairness and professionalism, she had never thought it had left any impression on the men she guarded. But now here was one, a black man serving life in a system built to break him, risking retribution to save her. His voice dropped further, almost inaudible. They got weapons, Carver's got a shiv, Lynch has a sock filled with batteries, and Maddox, he's the worst. He's got a key, a master key, and if he uses it, they'll open every cell in this block. The words hit her like a physical blow, the realization crashing down that this wasn't just about her patrol, it was about the possibility of unleashing chaos across the entire facility. Dozens of inmates freed within minutes, a riot that could overwhelm guards before reinforcements even arrived. The radio crackled again, more insistent this time, dispatch repeating the call. Unit 12, confirm status, respond immediately, and Lauren's hand hovered over the button, but her mind raced with the weight of what Darius had just revealed. If she responded and backup came, the ambush might be triggered prematurely, leading to bloodshed. But if she ignored it, she would be on her own, relying only on the word of an inmate to survive. Darius's whisper cut through her thoughts again. They tried to bring me in, told me to block your path, said I had nothing to lose, but I told them no. I've been listening. I know what they plan. And if you go down that hall without knowing, you won't come back. Lauren looked into his eyes again, searching for deception, for the glint of manipulation. But what she saw was raw fear, not for himself, but for her. And in that moment, she made the choice to trust him, at least enough to hear more. She glanced down the corridor once more, the stillness pressing heavy, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer than before, hiding possibilities she couldn't ignore. Her voice came out in a whisper, quieter than she thought possible. Where exactly are they? And Darius's reply was quick, detailed, and chilling. Carver's in the supply closet near the checkpoint, Lynch is behind the water fountain, Maddox is by the emergency exit blind spot, the one the cameras don't see. She tried to steady her breathing, counting each inhale as she had been trained to do in high-stress moments, but nothing in the academy had prepared her for the chilling certainty that men she had supervised for months, even years, were now hidden in shadows waiting for the perfect moment to end her life. She leaned slightly closer to Darius, her lips barely moving, whispering what her mind screamed. If this key is real, if they can open the cells, the whole block will erupt. And Darius nodded slowly, his face grim in the flickering fluorescent light, his dark eyes carrying the weight of a man who had witnessed too much and carried scars invisible to anyone but himself. He explained in low, tense words how Maddox had acquired the key, not through luck or ingenuity, but through corruption. A guard's nephew who worked maintenance had been making copies for cash, and Maddox, with connections outside, had bought one for $5,000, a price that made Lauren's stomach twist because it meant there were more, maybe many more, floating in the hands of men who should never have them. Her mind darted through the implications like a rapid-fire slideshow, the block unraveling as steel doors slid open, hardened men pouring out with weapons improvised from toothbrush handles, socks filled with batteries, shards of metal smuggled in from forgotten corners, guards overwhelmed, radios screaming for help, control rooms blinking red with alarms, the chaos spilling beyond Block C into Block D, then Block A, the entire facility cascading into riot while she stood at the center of it, the first domino pushed by shadows she could not see. Lauren's throat tightened as she realized this was not just about her survival, but about preventing a disaster that could spread beyond prison walls, endangering not only guards but the entire city if dangerous inmates escaped. She asked again, forcing her whisper to remain steady. Why tonight? Why now? And Darius lowered his gaze, his shoulders tense as he replied, because tomorrow morning a transport is coming. Federal inmates, high value, men with connections and money. If they start chaos tonight, they can use the confusion to escape when the vans arrive. That's the plan. It's not just about killing you, it's about breaking this place wide open. The weight of his words pressed against her chest until she thought she couldn't breathe. And she realized with sickening clarity that the silence of Block C was not accidental, but rehearsed. A collective pause before the storm, every man holding his breath because they knew what was coming, because they had been promised blood and freedom in exchange for patience. She thought back over the past weeks to the way conversations had stopped when she entered, the way some inmates had smirked in ways that didn't make sense at the time, the sudden quiet after laughter when her footsteps echoed down the hall, and now all those memories locked together into a single picture, the picture of her being led blindly into a trap she might never walk out of. Her radio crackled again, dispatch more urgent now. Unit 12, confirm, respond immediately, or backup will be dispatched. And she knew she had seconds left to choose, seconds before her silence triggered suspicion not only from her attackers but from her own colleagues. Darius's eyes locked on hers again, his whisper urgent. If you call them now, they'll know I told you. They'll disappear into the dark, and they'll strike again later when you least expect it. And I won't be able to warn you then. Trust me now. Act smart now." She closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of 8 years on this job pressing into her bones. Every lesson, every protocol, every warning about trust and survival colliding with the undeniable truth reflected in the man before her. He was risking everything, risking his own life in this brutal hierarchy where snitches were marked men just to give her a chance to live. When she opened her eyes, the corridor stretched ahead like a long throat swallowing her whole, the checkpoint door waiting 50 yards away, the vending machines where the tunnel lay hidden further behind her, each path fraught with deadly consequences, each choice demanding a sacrifice she wasn't sure she could make. She whispered, so softly even she barely heard it, "If you're lying, if this is a setup," and Darius cut her off with a sharp shake of his head, his voice trembling but resolute. "In all the years I've been here, have I ever lied to you? Have I ever asked you for anything? Tonight is the first and only time. And if you walk down that hall blind, you won't make it." His words struck deep because they were true. He had been invisible, a ghost in this place, never asking favors, never demanding attention, and now he was begging her to trust him once, just once, because the price of ignoring him was death. Lauren took a deep breath, forcing her hand away from her radio, pressing her back against the cold wall, her mind spinning through possible outcomes, her heart hammering so loudly she feared the men in hiding could hear it echo off the concrete. She thought of her brother Carlos, of the drug ring he had taken down, of how Darius had said this attack was also revenge against her family, and suddenly she realized that even if she survived tonight, the danger would not end. The network outside would keep pressing, keep punishing, until she and her family were broken. The rage that rose inside her pushed back against the fear, a hot surge of determination that told her she could not, would not, be a victim stumbling blindly into their plan. Lauren Hayes stood in the shadow of cell 18 with her heart thudding inside her chest as if it were trying to escape, her mind looping over everything Darius Cole had told her, the master key, the ambush, the carefully chosen positions of Carver, Lynch, and Maddox, and the looming threat of a riot planned to coincide with the federal transport the next morning. And she realized that what she faced was not just a moment of personal danger, but a layered conspiracy that threatened the integrity of the entire facility, the safety of her colleagues, and the very structure of order inside Monroe County Correctional Facility. Her breathing slowed, her senses sharpening as she tried to piece together the fragments of the story, yet in that heightened awareness, she caught something in Darius's eyes, something unsaid, a hesitation that suggested there was more he had not revealed, and she leaned closer to the bars, whispering against her own better judgment, "This isn't all of it, is it? There's more you haven't told me." Darius looked away briefly, his jaw tightening, his hands gripping the edge of the bunk until his knuckles whitened, and then he turned back, his voice trembling but steady enough to carry the truth. "They picked you for a reason. It's not random. It's because of your brother, Detective Carlos Hayes. He arrested Rodriguez's cousin in that big drug bust last month, and these men swore revenge. They want to use you as the message. They want to hurt you to hurt him, to make him suffer, to prove that nobody touches their family without paying." The words struck like a hammer blow, the pieces aligning in Lauren's mind with terrible clarity because she remembered Carlos mentioning the bust, the 2 kilos of product seized, the arrest that cut deep into the supply chain, and she realized she had dismissed it as just another story in his dangerous line of work, never imagining it would spill over into hers. Yet now it was clear she was caught in the crossfire of a vendetta larger than herself. Her stomach knotted as she thought of Carlos's wife, of his 3 young children who played Little League and rode their bikes in quiet suburban streets, children who believed their father's badge was a shield against evil, and she felt cold dread grip her at the thought that this conspiracy was not confined to the prison walls, that if the men inside knew so much about her schedule, her route, her brother's cases, then they could know more, they could know addresses, habits, weaknesses. She whispered back, her voice lower now, almost breaking, "They know where I live, don't they?" And Darius's silence was answer enough before he finally nodded, his eyes full of pity. "They know everything. They've watched, they've planned. This isn't just tonight. This is war against your family, against the system your brother represents. And if you don't stop it here, it won't stop at all." The enormity of it threatened to crush her. The sense that she was not only guarding her own life, but protecting her family from a vendetta with no limits. And yet, as fear rose inside her, so did anger, a defiance that came from somewhere deeper than training or duty, a defiance born of blood ties and the refusal to see her family dragged into the mud by criminals who thrived on intimidation. Her radio crackled once more, dispatch's voice firmer this time. Unit 12, respond immediately, confirm status or backup will be deployed, and her thumb hovered again over the button, but she forced herself to lower her hand, forcing the calm into her body even as adrenaline surged, knowing that calling now would only scatter the conspirators and leave her blind for the next attempt. And she needed more. She needed every piece of information before she made her move. Darius leaned closer to the bars, whispering fiercely now, "You can't fight them alone, not head on. If you walk into that corridor, you'll be dead before you draw your weapon, but you've got time. You've got knowledge they don't know you have. Use it. Use me if you need to. I'll take the risk, because if they kill you, they win, and I can't live with that." She studied him, wondering why a man serving life, a man who owed nothing to her, would risk his own survival in a place where betrayal was death. And she realized that his motives were not about bargains or gain, but about dignity, about refusing to let evil triumph when he could act. And that realization steadied her, because if a man with nothing to lose would risk everything to help her, then she had no excuse to cower. Lauren Hayes stood with her back pressed against the cold wall, her chest tight with the crushing weight of everything Darius had revealed, the vendetta against her family, the master key in the wrong hands, the corrupt guards feeding the conspiracy, and the looming chaos timed with the arrival of federal transports the next morning. And she knew that every choice she made from this moment forward was no longer about one woman surviving a shift, but about preventing a chain reaction that could rip open the prison and spill violence far beyond its walls. Her radio remained silent now after she had turned down the volume. Dispatch unaware that she was standing in the middle of a battle between shadows, and though protocol demanded she call in every detail, she had already decided that blind protocol would kill her, would play into the hands of men who expected her to move like a machine, predictable and vulnerable. Darius leaned forward again, his whisper pulling her out of the storm in her mind. There is another way, one they don't know you know, a chance to get ahead of them instead of walking into their trap, but it's risky. Maybe more dangerous than the ambush itself. She tightened her jaw, nodding once for him to continue, her eyes sharp even though every muscle in her body trembled with tension. Darius told her about the maintenance tunnel, a narrow shaft hidden behind the vending machines near Cell 22, an access route built for repair crews but rarely used, tight enough that only one person could crawl through at a time, leading to Block B's corridor, bypassing the checkpoint entirely, and offering her a chance to slip away from the kill zone the conspirators had prepared. He explained that the machines covered the panel completely, that most inmates didn't even know it existed, but there was a catch. To reach it, she would have to walk past 3 cells that housed allies of Carver and Lynch, men who were not directly involved in the ambush but loyal enough to sound the alarm the moment they saw her moving differently than usual. Lauren pictured the path in her mind, the vending machines looming in her memory, and the distance that separated her from them. Only 20 yards, but 20 yards that might as well have been a mile in the silence of Block C, where every step echoed like thunder and every eye in the darkness seemed to watch her. She weighed the danger, walking forward into an ambush where weapons and a master key awaited her, or risking discovery by men who could shout and ruin the only alternative path that might save her life. Her heart pounded harder as she considered the risk of crawling into a tunnel she barely fit inside, her equipment belt scraping against the walls, her weapon difficult to draw in such tight space, the suffocating air pressing against her lungs. And yet she also knew that if she reached the far side, she could break free of the trap, alert trustworthy colleagues, and possibly cut off the riot before it ignited. Darius's eyes burned into hers as he whispered with the intensity of a man betting everything. You have to try, because if you walk that hall the way they expect, it's already over. And if you do nothing, they'll find another night, another way, and maybe next time there won't be anyone to warn you, so you move now, while you still can, before they realize I spoke. His words resonated because she knew he was right. knew that standing frozen in indecision would kill her faster than any weapon, and she forced herself to steady her breathing, to let her training blend with instinct, to let anger harden into resolve. Lauren whispered back, "If I do this, if I get through, they'll come for you, they'll know you warned me, they'll kill you before the night is over." And Darius gave the faintest of smiles, bitter but sincere. "I've been living with death since the day I walked into this place. If helping you stops them, then it's worth the risk, but don't waste a chance. Don't let them win." His words lodged deep in her chest, heavier than her vest, heavier than her weapon, because she understood the cost he was accepting, and she swore silently that if she survived, she would not let his sacrifice vanish into shadows unnoticed. She turned her gaze back down the corridor, past the checkpoint glowing faintly under the weak fluorescent light, her imagination already painting the ambush waiting there, then glanced behind her toward where the vending machine sat against the wall, cold steel boxes that now represented both risk and hope. She began to walk, her footsteps slow and measured, her face carefully neutral, each movement calculated to appear routine, while her mind raced with the knowledge that men were watching from the dark, that Carver, Lynch, and Maddox were waiting for her silhouette to cross the checkpoint's blind spot so they could strike, and that allies in the nearby cells could ruin everything if they sensed her deviation. Every step she took toward the vending machines felt like a test, her boots tapping against the floor like a drumbeat announcing her choice, and she forced herself not to look toward the ambush site, not to give away the shift in her plan, focusing instead on the memory of Darius's voice guiding her toward survival. Her radio, still turned low, crackled faintly against her shoulder, dispatch's voice distant now, calling for confirmation, but she ignored it, her silence another weight pressing against her, but one she bore willingly. She passed cell 20, hearing faint breathing inside, the shuffle of movement as a man stirred, perhaps awake, perhaps watching, and she kept her eyes forward, her stride unchanged, though her hand brushed against the grip of her weapon for reassurance. By the time she reached the edge of cell 22, the vending machines looming only feet away, sweat trickled down her spine despite the cool air, her body taut with fear and anticipation. She saw the faint outline of the panel Darius had described, the screws holding it in place, the path that could take her away from the trap, and she realized she had only moments to act before the watchers understood she wasn't heading where they expected. Lauren adjusted her pace, timed her movement with the flicker of the overhead light, and in one swift motion slipped behind the vending machines, her back pressed to the cold steel, her breath ragged as she pulled the small multi-tool from her belt. Her hands trembled as she began to work on the screws, each turn of metal against metal echoing louder than a shout in her ears. But she pressed on, whispering a silent prayer that the sound would be lost in the restless air of the block. The first screw loosened easily, but the second resisted, rust clinging stubbornly, and she put her full strength into it. Her teeth clenched, her breath held, until it finally gave way with a groan that seemed deafening in the silence. She froze, waiting for movement from the cells nearby, waiting for a shout that never came, and then hurriedly moved to the third screw. Her fingers slipped on sweat as she twisted, the seconds dragging like hours, and she knew that every delay was another chance for Carver and the others to grow impatient, to check their positions, to sense something was wrong, but she forced herself to focus, to finish the task, and when the last screw clattered softly to the floor, she pulled the panel free to reveal the narrow darkness of the maintenance tunnel. She took one final look down the corridor, knowing the ambush was still there, knowing the conspirators thought her steps would soon carry her into their waiting arms, and then she lowered herself into the suffocating crawl space, her knees scraping against rough concrete, her weapon awkward at her hip, her heart pounding with the knowledge that her survival now depended on inches of space and moments of silence. Lauren Hayes crawled into the suffocating darkness of the maintenance tunnel with sweat dripping down her back, her radio muted, her weapon pressed awkwardly against her hip, and her knees scraping against the rough concrete floor as she moved inch by inch away from the vending machines and the block where 3 men waited to kill her. But no matter how tight the space was, no matter how claustrophobic the crawl became, she felt a fragile sense of relief that she had not walked blindly into their ambush, that she had taken the chance Darius Cole had given her, though the relief lasted only moments before the truth pressed down on her again, the truth that she was not safe, not yet, and that every sound, every movement could betray her. The tunnel was narrow and airless, the only light the faint glow from the vending machine panel she had left open behind her, and as she crawled, the silence became unbearable, her breathing louder than she wanted, echoing off the closed walls until she feared the men outside could hear her progress. She tried to keep her mind sharp, focusing on the path ahead, on the promise that the tunnel would lead to Block B's corridor and a possible escape from the trap, but her thoughts betrayed her, looping back to her family, to Carlos and his children, to the vendetta that stretched beyond these walls, and she clenched her jaw, reminding herself that her only option was to survive long enough to fight back. Halfway through the crawl, she froze at the sound of footsteps echoing faintly behind her, distant but deliberate, and her blood ran cold as she realized someone was moving near the vending machines, someone who might have noticed the panel open, someone who might be following. She pressed herself tighter against the floor, barely breathing, her mind racing with possibilities. Had Carver grown impatient? Had Maddox doubled back? Had one of the allies in nearby cells seen her and alerted the others? But before she could finish the thought, a voice drifted faintly through the narrow space, smooth and mocking. "Evening, Officer Hayes, working late tonight?" The words chilled her to the bone because she recognized the voice. It was Earl Benton, a loyal ally of Carver's who occupied Cell 19, a man known for his violence and his loyalty to the worst elements in Block C, and his tone carried casual menace, as if he already knew she was there, as if he had been waiting for her to reveal herself. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she stayed perfectly still, hoping the tunnel concealed her presence, but the voice came again, closer this time. "You think you can sneak past us? You think we don't see? But we see everything in here? Every step you take, every move you make, and tonight you made the wrong one." She clenched her fists, knowing Earl could not fit into the tunnel easily, but that didn't matter because if he shouted, if he alerted Carver and Maddox and Lynch, they would know exactly where she was and cut her off on the other side, turning her only chance into a death trap. She began crawling faster, her knees burning against the concrete, her equipment belt scraping noisily, and she cursed herself for the sound but pressed on, her only thought to reach the far side before Earl's taunts turned into shouts that brought the others. Behind her, metal scraped against concrete, a sound that sent a chill through her veins, and she risked a glance back to see the faint glow from the vending machine panel blocked by movement, Earl's shadow looming as he tried to peer inside. "She's in there," he hissed, his voice sharp now, not casual but certain, and her worst fear came true as his voice rose louder, echoing through the block. "She's in the tunnel, she's running," just like he said she would. Her blood froze at the last words, just like he said she would, because it meant they had expected this. It meant her choice, her desperate gamble, had already been calculated into their plan, and a wave of dread swept over her as she realized she had not outmaneuvered them at all. She had walked straight into another layer of their trap. Panic surged, but she fought to control it, forcing her arms and legs to move faster, crawling through the tight space with scraped skin and ragged breath, her eyes fixed on the faint light ahead that promised an exit. Even as the echo of footsteps grew louder on the other side, men repositioning, men racing to cut her off where the tunnel emerged in Block B. She thought of Darius's warning that the conspirators had help inside the guard ranks, men who could cut cameras, men who could open doors, and she understood now that every path she chose might already be compromised. That survival meant not just moving, but anticipating the trap within the trap. Her lungs burned, the tunnel pressing tighter, but she pushed harder, her fingers clawing at the concrete to drag herself forward, her body trembling with adrenaline, and just as she neared the opening, just as the light grew brighter, a hand shot through the gap ahead, strong fingers closing around her ankle with crushing force. Her scream caught in her throat as she kicked back with her free foot, connecting with bone, the impact sending pain up her leg but loosening the grip enough for her to tear free, and she scrambled forward, bursting out of the tunnel into the dim corridor of Block B, her body shaking, her hands trembling as she raised her weapon instinctively, scanning left and right. The corridor was empty for now, but the echoes of movement told her it would not remain so for long, and she realized with a surge of horror that the conspirators had not only known about her attempt, but had stationed men on both sides of the tunnel, waiting to trap her no matter which way she chose. Her chest heaved as she pressed against the wall, trying to think, trying to calculate her next move, when Earl's voice echoed again, carried through the ventilation like a ghost. "We've got her now. She's not going anywhere," just like Maddox planned. The silence of the corridor did not fool her, because silence in this prison was never empty. It was always pregnant with menace, with footsteps waiting just out of sight, with whispers plotting in the shadows, and now it was worse because she knew they were hunting her deliberately, using her own desperation to push her where they wanted her. She tightened her grip on her pistol, her finger brushing against the trigger guard as she forced herself to slow her breathing, every lesson from the academy rushing back into her head. But none of those lessons had ever taught her what to do when betrayal inside the ranks gave inmates the upper hand. She stepped forward cautiously, each boot striking the concrete like a gunshot in her ears, and she scanned the dim corridor ahead, knowing that at any moment she could be ambushed again, knowing the men she hunted were hunting her back. Her mind raced with the memory of Darius Cole's warnings, the list of weapons, Carver's shiv, Lynch's sock filled with batteries, Maddox's master key, and she imagined the damage each could inflict if she allowed herself to be cornered. She thought of Earl's mocking voice echoing through the tunnel, telling the others she was running, confirming to her that her every step was being tracked. And she realized with bitter clarity that every move she made would have to be unpredictable, that survival now depended not on brute force or protocol, but on outthinking men who believed she was just another guard blindly following orders. She turned left at the end of the corridor, her weapon steady, her eyes sharp, and caught movement at the edge of her vision, a shadow slipping behind a steel support column. She snapped her weapon up and advanced, her voice steady, though her insides shook. "Show yourself," but no reply came, only the echo of her words bouncing back at her, mocking her isolation. Her radio crackled faintly against her shoulder, dispatch's distant voice calling her designation, but she didn't dare raise it, not yet, because she knew if she called for help now, the attackers would scatter, retreat to fight another night, and she would be left with nothing but paranoia, and the certainty that they would come for her again when she was less prepared. No, she thought fiercely, this ends tonight, one way or another. She advanced further into Block B, her eyes scanning every corner, every blind spot, and suddenly from behind the column a figure lunged Lynch, his eyes wild, a sock weighted with batteries swinging toward her head. Instinct took over and she ducked, the heavy strike whistling past her ear and smashing against the wall with a sickening thud, and she drove her shoulder into his chest, slamming him backward, her weapon pressed against his ribs. His grin was twisted, feral as he hissed, "Do it, guard, pull that trigger, then you'll never get out alive." And in that split second she realized that shooting him would bring every conspirator running, confirming her exact position, while holding back gave him the chance to strike again. She twisted sharply, knocking the sock from his grip, the battery spilling across the floor, and drove her knee into his stomach, sending him crumpling with a grunt, but she didn't wait to see if he recovered. She sprinted down the hall, the sound of more footsteps echoing behind her, heavier and faster this time. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed, but she pushed herself harder, her mind focused only on escape, on outmaneuvering the men closing in. She darted around another corner and nearly collided with Carver, his shiv flashing in the dim light, his grin hungry as he slashed toward her. She recoiled just in time, the blade grazing her sleeve, and shoved him back with all her strength, firing a warning shot into the wall beside him. The crack of the gunshot exploded through the block, deafening in the enclosed space, and for a moment everything froze, the echoes of pursuit stopped, the whispers went silent, even Carver hesitated, his grin faltering as the reality of her weapon sank in. But the pause lasted only seconds before chaos erupted again, footsteps pounding as men repositioned, voices shouting in the distance, and Lauren knew the sound of her shot had given her away completely. She sprinted again, her boots slapping against the floor, her eyes scanning desperately for another way out, another option before the trap closed entirely. And then she saw it, the heavy steel door leading to the security checkpoint, still locked, but she knew Maddox would be waiting near the blind spot where cameras didn't reach. Her stomach twisted with dread because every path led to him eventually. Every choice forced her closer to the man who had orchestrated the whole scheme, The man who held the master key and the confidence of someone who believed he could break her. Her weapon trembled slightly in her grip as she slowed, pressing herself against the wall to catch her breath, her chest heaving, sweat dripping down her temple. She could hear Carver groaning behind her, Lynch stumbling back to his feet, their curses echoing, their voices rallying, and she realized she had only moments before they regrouped. She closed her eyes briefly, drawing in a steadying breath, reminding herself of Darius's voice, of the desperate warning that had pulled her from the path of certain death, and she whispered to herself fiercely, "I am not prey. I am not their message. I am not their victim." The words steadied her, hardened her resolve, and when she opened her eyes again, they burned with the fire of defiance. She pushed forward toward the checkpoint, each step deliberate, her weapon ready, her senses stretched to the breaking point, and as she rounded the corner, she saw him, Maddox, tall and broad-shouldered, his pale skin catching the flicker of light, the master key glinting in his hand as he twirled it casually like a trophy. His eyes met hers, cold and amused, and he smirked as though the entire night had been a game he believed he was winning. "There you are," he said, his voice calm, almost polite. "I was beginning to think you'd lost your nerve, but here you are, right where I wanted you." Lauren raised her weapon, her hand steady now despite the fear coursing through her veins, and she forced her voice to remain level. "Drop it now." Maddox only chuckled, his smirk widening as he slid the key into his pocket with infuriating calm. "You won't shoot, not yet, because you know the second you do, the whole block explodes, and then it's not just your life on the line, it's everyone's." His confidence was suffocating, his certainty, a weapon as sharp as any blade, and Lauren realized that the real battle had just begun, not of weapons, but of wills, and the outcome would decide whether the prison stood firm or fell into chaos. Lauren Hayes kept her weapon raised, her chest heaving as she faced Maddox in the dim light of the checkpoint corridor, the master key no longer dangling from his fingers, but tucked in his pocket like a promise of destruction waiting to be unleashed. And though every instinct screamed for her to fire, to end this now before he could twist the game further, she knew the sound of a bullet would ignite the block like a powder keg, turning controlled silence into unstoppable chaos, and she forced herself to hold, to breathe, to think as Maddox smirked with the casual arrogance of a man who has spent his life manipulating fear. His words slithered through the stale air. "It doesn't matter what you do, guard, we've already won, because every second you stand here frozen is another second Carver and Lynch move into position, another second Earl tells the others how you ran, another second the plan unfolds exactly as we wrote it." His confidence was infuriating, but beneath it, Lauren sensed calculation, the way he kept glancing not at her weapon, but at the far corridor, as though measuring time, as though he was waiting for the others to close in, and she realized he was stalling, keeping her locked in place while the trap sealed tight. Her heart pounded, but her mind raced faster, remembering Darius's warning that Maddox was the clever one, the one who thought several moves ahead, and she understood that simply confronting him here would not break the cycle, that she needed to think beyond reaction and anticipate the larger plan. She shifted her stance slightly, her boots scraping softly against the floor, and Maddox's smirk widened. "Go ahead, take your shot, but know this, when you do, the key doesn't just open doors, it opens the whole block. And when that happens, not even your brother in the Houston PD will save you or your family." The mention of Carlos made her stomach twist, anger surging hot through her veins, because now the conspiracy was no longer faceless criminals, but a direct strike at her blood, and she whispered fiercely through clenched teeth, "If you touch my family, I will bury you in the ground." Maddox only chuckled, his pale eyes gleaming with amusement. "We already touched them, Officer Hayes. You just don't know it yet." The words sliced into her, her vision narrowing with rage, but before she could react, the sound of footsteps thundered behind her, Carver and Lynch closing the distance, their voices echoing as they rallied, and in that moment Lauren knew she had only seconds before she was flanked, outnumbered, and finished. She darted to the side, taking cover behind a steel support beam as Carver's voice rang out, "She's pinned, don't let her move," and Lynch's guttural laugh followed, the sock of batteries clinking faintly in his hand. Lauren's mind raced, calculating angles, distances, the line of sight, and her options dwindled with each passing second, until a memory surfaced the fire alarm pull station just beyond the checkpoint, the one she had noted countless times but never needed, and she realized that if she could trigger it, emergency protocols would lock the block down, sealing doors, cutting access, and buying her precious time. But reaching it meant exposing herself, meant running into Maddox's line of fire with nothing but resolve, and the decision pressed down like a weight, survival demanding she retreat through the tunnel and abandon the fight, duty demanding she face the threat head on even if it meant her life. Her thoughts returned to Darius, still locked in his cell in Block C, the man who had risked everything to warn her, the man Maddox and Earl would surely kill as punishment for betrayal if she vanished now, and she realized this was not just about her survival or her family's safety, it was about keeping her word, about refusing to let a man who had shown her humanity be slaughtered because she chose the easier path. The choice hardened inside her, the moral weight burning away hesitation, and she whispered to herself, "I can't leave him, I won't leave him," before bracing her weapon and stepping back into the open. Maddox's smirk faltered for the first time as he saw the resolve in her eyes, as he realized she was no longer playing by his script, and before he could move, Lauren bolted toward the checkpoint, bullets of fear pounding through her veins as Carver lunged from her left and Lynch from her right. She fired once into the floor, the deafening crack scattering them for a heartbeat, enough for her to dive forward and slam her hand against the fire alarm. The sirens wailed instantly, red lights flashing, steel doors clanging shut throughout the block with thunderous finality, and in that chaos Lauren rolled to her feet, her weapon raised again as Maddox cursed, his smirk gone, his calm replaced with fury. "You stupid, now you're locked in here with us," he shouted over the blaring sirens, and his words chilled her because they were true. The lockdown sealed everyone inside, leaving her trapped in the corridor with 3 violent men and no reinforcements until the system reset. But even as fear gnawed at her, she held her ground, her weapon steady, her voice clear as she shouted back, "Then let's finish it here, because I'm done running." The flashing red lights painted the corridor in violent color, shadows dancing, faces distorted, and Lauren saw Carver's grin twisted by the light, Lynch's wild eyes flickering like those of a predator, and Maddox standing tall, the master key glinting in his hand again as he drew it from his pocket like a weapon in its own right. She adjusted her grip on her pistol, her heartbeat matching the wail of the sirens, and for the first time that night she felt not like prey, but like a soldier standing against an army. Her fear transformed into defiance, her moral choice binding her to the fight ahead. The wail of the fire alarm rattled the walls and the red emergency lights strobed through the corridor as Lauren Hayes kept her weapon trained on Maddox, her lungs burning with the acrid stench of recycled air pressed through the emergency vents, her ears ringing from the deafening sirens that turned the prison into a nightmare maze of sound and shadow, and she knew she had just sealed herself inside with the very men who wanted her dead. Maddox stood tall in the flashing red, his pale face illuminated in grotesque intervals, the master key clenched in his hand like a symbol of power, and his smirk had returned, colder, sharper, as though the alarm had only confirmed the inevitability of his plan. Carver circled to her left, the shiv gleaming as it caught a flicker of light, and Lynch to her right, the sock of battery swinging in his fist, his grin wide and unhinged, and together they moved like predators working as one to corner prey. Lauren kept her stance low, her pistol steady, forcing herself to ignore the pounding of her heart and the ache in her arms as she tracked their movements, refusing to let any of them slip out of sight. Maddox's voice cut through the chaos, mocking and measured. "You think pulling that alarm saved you, but all it did was lock you in with us. No backup, no escape, no hope, just the 3 of us and 1 of you. And when this is over, your brother will know exactly what happens when he crosses our family." The mention of Carlos again ignited rage deep inside her, hot and unyielding, and she used it to steel her voice, sharp and unwavering despite the fear crawling under her skin. "You won't touch him, you won't touch my family, and you won't win tonight." Maddox chuckled darkly, his eyes glinting with cruel amusement. "We already have. You just haven't realized it yet." His confidence seeped into the air like poison, and Lauren knew he was trying to break her resolve before they even struck, to make her second guess her every movement, but she shut it out, focusing instead on angles, distance, timing, and the knowledge that hesitation would mean death. Carver lunged first, the shiv slicing through the space where her ribs had been a second earlier as she twisted and fired a shot into the wall behind him, the sound exploding through the corridor and forcing him to stumble back, startled by the crack that echoed like thunder. Lynch charged next, his sock swinging, and she sidestepped, slamming her elbow into his jaw with enough force to send him reeling. But Maddox never moved, only watching, waiting, studying her like a chess piece he intended to sacrifice pawns against until she made the mistake he wanted. Lauren's chest heaved as she kept her pistol steady, the muzzle flashing red under the emergency lights, and she realized with chilling clarity that Maddox's calm was more dangerous than the frenzy of the others because he was calculating every move, measuring how far she could be pushed before she cracked. She advanced a step, forcing Carver and Lynch to adjust their positions, their eyes darting nervously, and she shouted over the alarms, "Drop the weapons now, and you might live through this." But Maddox laughed coldly. "You don't get it. Officer Hayes, we're already dead in here, lifers with nothing left to lose, and men like us don't beg, we take." His words dripped with venom, but beneath them she heard truth, the desperation of men who believed destruction was their only freedom. And she tightened her grip, whispering fiercely under her breath, "Not tonight." The red lights flickered harder, casting long shadows that danced like phantoms, and suddenly Carver rushed again, faster this time, his shiv arcing high, and Lauren reacted without hesitation, her pistol snapping up, the shot ringing out, the bullet grazing his arm, and sending the blade clattering across the floor as he screamed in pain. Blood splattered the concrete, bright against the strobes, and Lynch roared in fury, swinging his sock wildly, forcing her back, the batteries whistling through the air dangerously close to her skull. She ducked low, rolled, and came up with her pistol aimed straight at his chest, her finger tightening on the trigger, but she held her fire at the last second, knowing the kill shot would bring Maddox down on her before she could reset. Instead, she kicked his knee hard, sending him sprawling, the sock slipping from his hand as he howled in rage. Maddox finally moved, stepping forward slowly, the master key dangling again from his fingers as though taunting her, and his voice cut sharper than any blade. "You can wound them, you can knock them down, but you can't stop me? Because this key opens everything, every door, every block, and once the others hear the alarm and see the chance, this place burns, with or without you." Lauren steadied her breath, her mind racing as she realized he was right, that even if she survived this corridor, the key in his hand was a weapon more dangerous than any shiv because it could turn the entire prison into a battlefield, and her survival meant nothing if the facility itself fell. She took a step forward, her weapon locked on him, her voice steady. "That key dies with you, Maddox, and so does your plan." His smirk widened, daring her to try, and for a heartbeat the siren seemed to fade, the world narrowing to the space between them, two wills colliding in the flashing red haze, each unwilling to break. Then Maddox slipped the key into his pocket again and motioned for Carver and Lynch to rise, his voice calm and cold. "We finished this now." The corridor pulsed with flashing red as the sirens wailed and the steel doors locked tight, and Lauren Hayes moved with the last reserves of her strength, her weapon raised, her heartbeat keeping time with the strobe of the emergency lights. As Maddox and his men closed in for the kill, their eyes gleaming with the frenzy of predators who believed victory was inevitable. Carver lunged first, his injured arm dripping blood but his rage undiminished, and Lauren sidestepped, pivoting to drive the butt of her pistol into his temple, the impact sending him crashing against the wall where he slumped with a groan, his shivless hand clutching at the wound she had inflicted. Lynch came next, wild-eyed, scrambling for his weighted sock, but Lauren was faster, her boot crushing down on it before he could grab it, her pistol snapping up to his face as she shouted over the alarms, "Stay down!" her voice sharp with authority, and for the first time his manic grin faltered, the weight of her resolve pinning him more effectively than any weapon. That left Maddox calm and calculating even as chaos swirled around him, the master key still clutched in his hand like the promise of freedom for dozens of dangerous men, and as their eyes locked in the strobe-lit haze, she saw not just a criminal, but the embodiment of every betrayal, every act of corruption, every whisper of vengeance that had led to this night. He stepped forward slowly, his voice cutting through the noise. You think this ends with me, but it doesn't. There are others, more keys, more guards willing to sell their souls, more men ready to take what's theirs, and you can't stop us all. And Lauren's chest tightened because she knew he was telling the truth, that corruption had spread deeper than this one man, yet she also knew that stopping him here mattered, that one act of defiance could break the chain of fear that men like him thrived on. She raised her weapon higher, her voice steady despite the tremor in her muscles. Maybe I can't stop them all, but I can stop you, and that's enough tonight. And Maddox's smirk wavered for the first time, the certainty in his pale eyes flickering with doubt. He lunged suddenly, faster than she expected, the key flashing as he tried to drive it into the control panel of the checkpoint door, but Lauren fired, the bullet striking his shoulder and spinning him back against the wall, the key clattering to the floor where it skidded across the concrete. Maddox howled in pain, clutching his wound, his face twisted with fury and disbelief. But before he could recover, Lauren kicked the key away, sliding it beneath a locked grate where his bloody hands could never reach. Carver groaned faintly where he lay, Lynch crouched in fear, and Maddox slumped against the wall, his arrogance shattered. And in that moment, the sirens that had once sounded like doom now felt like salvation, because they meant backup was on its way, because they meant the prison would not fall tonight. Lauren kept her weapon trained until she heard the pounding of boots from the other side of the sealed doors, the voices of guards shouting her name, and when the lockdown finally lifted with a thunderous clang, armed officers poured into the corridor, weapons raised, eyes wide at the scene before them. Maddox, Carver, and Lynch were dragged away in restraints, shouting curses and threats that no longer carried the same weight, and Lauren lowered her weapon at last, her body trembling, her knees weak, but her spirit burning stronger than ever. Later, as the chaos settled and the sirens faded, Darius Cole was removed from Block C and placed into protective custody, his testimony becoming the cornerstone of an investigation that tore through the rot in Monroe County Correctional Facility, exposing the guards who had sold keys, the networks of smuggling, and the connections to drug families outside the walls. Trials followed, convictions mounted, and for the first time in years, the prison began to heal, its foundation strengthened by the courage of a man who had chosen redemption and a woman who had refused to bend to fear. Lauren visited Darius once more before his transfer, their eyes meeting through the glass as he said quietly, "You didn't have to believe me, but you did, and because of that, none of this ended the way they wanted." She nodded, her throat tight, her voice steady, "Because you chose to stand up when it mattered, and I couldn't let that go to waste." The end. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'd love to hear what you think about the twists in this plot. Did Lauren make the right choices? And what do you think about Darius risking everything to help her? Drop a comment below and tell me your thoughts, and also share where in the world you're watching from. Your feedback and support mean a lot, and it helps bring more powerful stories like this to life.